since we've been talking a lot about AI, what you think the appropriate role of AI is in assisting the education workforce of the future. Let's start with you, Anna.
I think, well, thank you very much, John, and thank you for the opportunity of being here. I think AI can play a very important role, but at the same time, I think it's a critical question to think, how are we attracting the best talent into the education sector? Because you can have a lot of technology, but at the same time, when you think about, we have a challenge and we have, we have an opportunity, which is to develop our students as leaders of a better future, then usually when you have this challenge, you bring the best people, you hire the best people as an organization. So then why the education sector is not as aggressively recruiting this top talent, and it's like only, or part of it, investing very much in technology. So I think like we need to think about what are we doing to really attract this talent into the education sector, so that we can invest in the future leaders in our countries and in our planet, which are going to be the students that are now in the classroom. So how do we bring, alongside AI, how do we bring this top talent into the classroom?
So I'll ask you, what's the first thing you would do to make sure a country and economy is attracting teachers and the right kind of talented people into the education workforce?
Gosh, that's such a difficult question. I mean, we started with the launch of Teach for America more than 30 years ago, and that's what we're obsessed with. Like, how do we attract this talent? And we were seeing 30 years ago that, there were big investment banks, big management consultants, like really going into the career fairs and sitting, next to one another and saying like, yeah, come and work with me, but you didn't see anyone from the education sector. So what we've seen working across our network, which is now not only the US, but also in 60 different countries, is that you need to appeal to their values and their ideals, to the ideals of, the best recruits. You need to appeal to their sense of purpose, and knowing that purpose is the change that's happening right now in the classrooms. You need to appeal to them being part of a collective, so a broader movement, which is bigger than themselves, right? Like it's part of a broader movement. And you also need to appeal, and that's what we're doing at Teach for All, to the development of their leadership skills, so that they know that they can, have a lifelong career into the education sector. So that's what I've seen working.
Yeah, I see you nodding here about some of these ideas about attracting the right kind of talented people into the workforce. What are some key ways that you would do that?
So I don't think it's only about attracting new talent. I think it's about retaining good talent. And I do think that AI, but generative AI and technology have always played a role. Because it's always been about the changing demands on teachers. So some of the pieces that I've heard earlier have been about, what we want teachers to do in the future. Well, they've already been dealing with changes for decades. This is not new, from graphing calculators to, student information software. All of those tasks, some of them have made it easier for teachers. It has taken away from the strain of non-teaching time that they have to spend a lot of their times on, like administrative tasks, facilitating, generating personalized lesson plans. That old model of chalk and talk is not something that I have seen in a while. So I think that's something that has been moved forward because teachers have taken it upon themselves. But until we actually create and cultivate, it is something about fulfilling their purpose. I completely agree with that. But it's also about giving them a space where they can be professionals and achieve that purpose and not feel like they've got 50 kids in a classroom where they're trying to personalize learning and do what they've been taught to do well, but don't have the time to do it anymore. So if we can use AI or any kind of technology to alleviate that and then give them that time within their workday to actually be able to do their PD, their professional development, and do their teaching in the way they want to do, the way they've been taught to do it, then you're going to see an elevation rather than a transactional delivery of curriculum.
What are some of the key challenges to attracting a talented workforce into education, and how would you solve some of these questions?
So first, a very good afternoon to everyone. I'll actually take on a thread of what you mentioned. For any employee or any team member to enter into any organization, it's the environment that's very important. So how enabled are you to do your job? What are the tools that are at your disposal that allows you to be able to deliver based on the outcomes that are requested? And the breadth of space that you're able to perform your selected profession, which you also mentioned. Those three elements is what attracts people to a certain profession and disincentivizes them to enter into a certain profession. In terms of wider education sectors, so if we talk about wider public education sectors, once the scale increases and you're dealing with schools at volume, we sometimes forget that there's still individualized learning happening at the level of every single individual in the classroom, and start systemizing everything. And it's the effort that goes into the overarching systemization of the overall system is what disrupts and removes that sort of personalized touch within the education sector. So we need to strike a right balance in not going generic. I know it's easier to manage from a system perspective, but it goes against the practice of education. Second, we heard, and your first question was about technology, and I think every single panel spoke about technology. We need to continuously remember that technology is a tool. And a tool, if deployed at the wrong time in the wrong setting, is actually a burden and a hurdle rather than a mechanism for development. And that's what we unfortunately see when we discuss AI technology and their deployment into the education sector, rather than flipping the question towards what are the needs today in every single classroom? What are the challenges that teachers face to bridge the gaps? Because we have inherited from, as effective as online education was, we have inherited a gap in education. How do we provide teachers at the level of the classroom and students the necessary tools? It could be technology, and it could not be technology. That's where we need to start asking the question. And
I'm gonna ask you that question. What are the necessary tools, and are we relying now too much on technology to solve a lot of the issues that education has had for a long time?
So I want to build on the minister's point there, because I think, some would say we're already in the fifth industrial revolution, some would say the fourth, but the reality is that the tools, the technology will keep changing. And many education systems, and let's also be clear that it looks very different in different parts of the world, many education systems have not even caught up with first or second industrial revolution technologies. And so we cannot now sort of say, well, we have generative AI, now we must adapt our education systems only to focus on that, because the tools will keep changing. So what we have to shift much more to are education systems which teach people how to continuously learn. And that by default then means changes to the teaching workforce, how they're valued, but also how they are themselves prepared and continuously upskilled. And one of the cases that does have to be made, I think, articulated much better by governments and by other stakeholders is one, that economic case that is very clear. Just switching to what we call one of the Education 4.0 skills, which is collaboration, would add over $2 trillion to the global economy. It's a study we did a short while ago with PwC.
And what do you mean specifically by the...
Exactly. If you deep dive into that, how do you help create that? You need a teaching workforce that is then going to be able to work with kids in addition to the basic skills that they have to be learning. They have to be able to work with children to be able to teach them that creativity, that collaboration, interpersonal skills, which comes through different forms of teaching than are applied today. That in itself would then, I could give you statistics after statistics of how much that would add to the global economy. A second case is the jobs case. Many parts of the world, developing and developed alike, are looking for new ways of job creation. This is a profession that, if done well, and if we met the actual unmet need for the teaching workforce, would, for example, add 2 million new teachers in India, would add over 200,000 new teachers in Australia. So there's, again, a jobs-related case. And the third case is social or even moral, if you will. It needs to be as important to invest in and empower and treat as truly essential workers, especially coming out of this pandemic, the teaching workforce, in the same way that we think about doctors and healthcare workers and others that are considered essential to making our societies go around. That case has to be built.
When people hear about these types of changes that need to happen, immediately they go to, well, do teachers need to be paid better? Do they need to be paid more compared to lawyers or people in other professions? Is that the only calculus that we should be doing in terms of what needs to change to attract a different kind of workforce?
Yeah, I think that's an important thing, but it's not the only one. And one of the things that we've seen is that they value as much their professional development, which is something that you might have like in any other organization. So for instance, we've seen that pre-service and in-service training, which is something that we offer, is very valued. Coaching, peer-to-peer learning, for instance, exposure to constant learning and connecting with one another. We actually at Teach for All have a whole connectivity team, we call them. We bring together, teachers and school principals and other of the education workforce around topics that they want to learn about, like climate education, girls' education. We create fellowships. So I think there's a matter of payment, but there's a matter of recognition of the workforce and the purpose and the impact that they have. And also there's the professional development support that they need.
If we're talking about teachers on the individual level, what sorts of traits and skills are ideal for this new type of teacher, this new type of learning that we're talking about for the future, or personalized learning? Are we talking about a different kind of teacher than in the past?
I don't believe we're looking for a different kind of teacher, but more harnessing and changing the equation towards a more skills-based. So everything that was mentioned today is a skills-based education that ensures that every student has the necessary skills to create the impact in their future role within society. And what that really means is our teachers who are able to transform skills and develop them, able to differentiate between the different opportunities that exist within a single classroom, are able to adapt and understand the world around them, which is very similar. I know it's very generic, but it's very similar to succeeding in every job that we have today, which then makes the element that we've spoken about, if we take a step back, what's really important today is creating the right environment in the schools. The same way that other jobs are attractive for people to have a career in, so should the education sector create that necessary environment at the level of every single school. And when we're able to achieve that, only then are we able to attract the best talent into the sector. And yes, pay is a challenge, but it's not the only one. There are a multitude of other factors that need to be present to be able to create the right environment for teachers to have conducive learning. And I want to echo again, technology is not the solution. It will not fix the challenges that exist within education, nor will it help us adapt and evolve down the line. It goes back to pedagogical practice that every single teacher is trained on, that is ultimately important in being able to not only convey the necessary knowledge to the student, but more importantly, the ability to utilize that knowledge effectively in various scenarios. And then now, even more importantly, and you just got a dollar figure on that, how to develop the necessary skills, be it collaboration, be it adaptability. And that is of utmost importance in terms of our children and what they need to graduate with.
Do you agree with this idea that technology is not a miracle worker in the classroom and in education in general?
Listen, when I was a teacher, I think I was one of the very first teachers who brought in probes and calculators into the labs. I went to the States, I got trained, I purchased it, I was a science department head. So I'm all for it, but listen to what I got trained, I was able to buy it, I was able to convince my board, I was able to convince my doctor. I had a particular environment where I got inspired and I was able to use it and leverage it and leave a legacy behind, and I was proud of that. I think what's more important than just technology is the value we place on educators. And it's not about their salary, but I'm talking about societal value. If we look at OECD countries, we're now in a place where almost 50% of young adults in OECD countries have a tertiary certificate in hand. And that translates into them having, on average, 50% more salary than their secondary graduate counterparts. Juxtapose that to the learning poverty rate of 70%, 7 out of 10 children in low and mid-income countries who cannot read a paragraph and understand it at the age of 10, a simple paragraph. So we're looking at a digital divide, but we're also looking at a divide amongst essentially the rich and the poor countries that is a root cause of future disenfranchisement for those people. And those 7 out of 10 children, when you look at the percentage and you do the math, it's a $21 trillion loss in potential income for our economy collectively. So saying that teachers need to be valued is not a nice to have argument. It is the argument for $21 trillion in these countries for our global economy. So we do need those people to feel like they're making a contribution and be honored by not just the other professionals, by economists, by macroeconomists, for us to be able to evolve and not just achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, which we know we're not going to achieve in time now, but to go beyond those.
How would you go about sort of raising this value of teachers? Like what can you do to make that happen?
Well, I do think that we've seen teacher bashing. I've seen it firsthand in Canada and the damage it does. We did a study on that when I was doing my PhD, and it's masses of excellent professionals leaving the profession and becoming other kinds of excellent professionals in the corporate sector. Yeah. The corporate sector might want to return some of those, but I think that we do need that partnership in terms of valuing them and communicating them with them and bringing in all of civil society. As a philanthropy, not myself, I run His Excellency's philanthropy, but what I love about my job, I have to say, is that I'm in that middle space. Right? I'm not a corporate, so I don't have their parameters, and I'm not government, and I don't have those parameters, and so on and so forth. We're in that kind of bridging space, and as a philanthropy, we get to be that bridge and serve others in that way, and I think that we need to engage our philanthropies more, welcome them into the fold, because the corporate sectors have certainly welcomed us, and so has the government. And I see a lot of my friends in the audience today who I hope that we do right by. And with that, we have managed to actually push that needle a little bit and keep some of our good people and get even more good people in, because we do need that glue together. But it only happened because His Excellency, the Minister, agreed a few years ago to let us in. Right? He extended his hand and he let us in, and then he extended his hand to the universities and said, "Those people, let's try and trust them." And then the corporate sectors did the same, and now we're all sitting at the same table with organic partnerships for shared values.
Anna, when let's say you're going out to a university and you're looking to identify good, talented professionals for the education workforce, what are you looking for today that might have been different maybe 5, 10 years ago?
Yeah, that's a great question. And not even 5, 10 years ago. I think the Generation Z is so different than the millennial generation. So we need to constantly innovate and adapt our strategies to, to bring this talent and these young graduates in the education sector. So for instance, things that we're seeing now is that Generation Z are an activist generation. They care a lot about well-being, especially after the pandemic. So I think we see our work at Teach for All also as having the commitment and the opportunity to help these young people recognize that long-term fulfillment and long-term well-being is going to come from, a congruence between their values and where they spend their time and their energy. So we try to really match their career interests with the values that they have and their sense of purpose. And that works even more for Generation Z. And we're seeing results happening. For instance, it's just interesting, Teach for Nigeria in Nigeria, they have inspired 79,000 young Nigerians to stay in the country, to work in the education sector. Or Teach for Pakistan in Pakistan, they just grew the cohort double, 120 teachers from a 3,000 pool of applications. So I think if you appeal to all these things that I was saying at the beginning and you innovate for Generation Z, it works. It can happen.
Yeah. I'm happy to say that during this entire discussion and the other discussions in this room, we have not mentioned once the pandemic. I'm really happy about that. But I do have a question about, for you, Sonia, about what are the lessons that have come out of the pandemic as it relates to fostering a good sort of education workforce?
Well, first I would say, and I think on a global scale, we've learned that the countries we might have expected to do better didn't. And I'm truly blessed to be living in this one during the pandemic because we did very well, so we were able to recover and see things better. We learned that people who were resistant to change became resilient to change and then became welcoming of change. And so I think that we just need to be careful because during the pandemic, what we saw was almost emergency response teaching. And I wouldn't want to take those ways of doing things during the pandemic and translate them into the future. But I would want to say that I dealt personally with individual educators who pre-pandemic, they were polite about it, but they pretty much threw me out of the office when I spoke about online learning. But called me up and said, actually, is there a better way to do this? And how are we going to secure our future teaching abilities as we go forward? What if there's another hit? But more than that, I think we have students and learners who have way higher expectations from education and educators and are a lot more vocal about it. And I am so happy about that because they are the people we're supposed to serve. And this new generation, I would agree with you, they're not afraid to say anything to anyone. And I think that that's fabulous because now we can hear the truth and start saying, okay, what can we do to change? Because now we know we can change. And I think those are the critical elements.
As the father of someone in that generation, I'm not so happy about the no fear of saying things to anyone. Are you seeing these same changes from the pandemic? What are you seeing as we emerge from this? What are you seeing as some of the permanent changes?
I think, if I may slightly rephrase your question,
Sure.
What should be the permanent changes that we try to ensure stay in place, and what we can learn and take away from everything that's happened over the last few years? The way we're trying to approach this question at the World Economic Forum is through a 10-year initiative called the Reskilling Revolution, of which one core part is a focus on Education 4.0. And the way we're trying to do this is, yes, the tools will keep changing, but among the best people to tell us how those tools are changing are some of the private sector, and in particular, some of the technology companies. So a sort of a learning journey with those companies and what they can teach us about what needs to change in the classroom. At the same time, working with governments to set up incubators, we call these national education accelerators, that help countries learn how to translate those Education 4.0 curricula into reality, and then get those countries to connect with each other on a global learning network. This is a sort of 3-year journey, and through that, hopefully, we learn enough through these experiments to be able to turn around and say, here's a public playbook that others can then continue to use and iterate. I think the work of the transformation that needs to happen in education or in teaching in particular is never done. And in fact, that's exactly what needs to happen in the classroom, and that is also the case with teaching and education systems. It's never quite done, but we're trying to contribute to that iteration, and very pleased to be partnering with the government of the UAE on that.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this discussion. Do any of you have any final points that you want to make? Something that came up in the discussion that you're dying to rebut or enhance in any way? Go for it.
I'll add one: valuing teachers, economically, socially, morally. I think that has to be.
It's a great note to end on. Thank you so much, all of you. And thank everyone. Thank you very much.